He was alone when it all began. Most only saw the final result, a film that sparked intense reactions around the world, applause and controversy, tears and outrage. But long before that, there was a man facing his own darkness. He wasn't the international star, nor the Oscar winner everyone knew. He was simply Mel, plunged into a silent crisis, going through days of emptiness and nights filled with thoughts that dragged like shadows. It was a pain no award could soothe, an internal weight no successful career could balance. Something inside him was imploding. In an attempt to silence the chaos, he turned to what he had left behind, his faith. But this return wasn't smooth. It was like an urgent fire growing within, burning away everything that wasn't essential. With his soul in ruins, he began rereading the Gospels. Each word sounded different, more vivid, more cutting. They weren't just stories from an old book. They were images forming before his eyes, passages that pierced him with force and made him rethink everything. He hadn't planned to make a film, at least not at first. It was as if the idea had arisen on its own, born of a deep unease, an uncontrollable need to show the truth as he felt it. Acting wasn't enough. He had to bear witness. And he knew he couldn't do it in a Hollywood way. It would be unfiltered, uncompromising, unsoftened to please modern audiences. If Jesus spoke Aramaic, then his film would too. If the soldiers spoke Latin, that was how it should sound. There would be no shortcuts or adaptations. When he presented the project to major studios, the reaction was almost unanimous. No. A film spoken in ancient languages, without famous stars, with a raw and direct approach to the Passion of the Christ, would not be commercially viable. But he wasn't seeking financial returns. What drove him was another kind of urgency, something that came from the depths of his soul. So he did the unthinkable. He used his own fortune to make the project a reality. Over $30 million just for filming, and another $30 million for distribution. Each scene was treated with the intensity of a sacred vow. Nothing could be faked. The sets were built in places that seemed out of time, in ancient lands, marked by the roughness of the soil and the harshness of the climate. The wind, the cold, the stones, everything was real, and with it also came the unexpected. From the first days of filming, crew members began reporting strange occurrences. It wasn't just the pressure of filming something so delicate. It was a collective feeling, as if there were a presence there, something unnameable. At specific moments, the silence became so dense, it felt material. During crucial scenes, tears would emerge unexplained. There was an energy, a vibrancy in the air that made it impossible to pretend it was just another movie. The lead himself, Jim Caviezel, felt this deeply. He accepted the role with faith, aware that he might face rejection later. But even he wasn't prepared for what would come. During filming, the suffering depicted wasn't just symbolic. In one of the most intense scenes, Caviezel was struck by one of the real whips, which escaped the rehearsed choreography. The metal cut his skin, leaving a scar he bears to this day. In another sequence, while carrying the heavy cross, he slipped and dislocated his shoulder. The pain we see on screen isn't in many instances just acting. It's real. The extreme cold on location caused hypothermia, pushing his body to its physical limit. And yet he continued, because it was no longer acting, it was something else, deeper, more serious, more transcendent. During one of the shoots at the top of the hill, while suspended on the cross, Caviezel was struck by lightning. Yes, lightning. The electrical discharge knocked him off balance, biting his tongue, suffering internal injuries, and ending up facing a long and painful recovery, which included heart surgery. Minutes later, another lightning strike struck a crew member. The second time, he had been struck by lightning during the shoot. Scientifically, it was unlikely. Spiritually, many saw it as a sign. Some said they were touching something too sacred, too powerful, to be translated without consequences. Even without directly mentioning any supernatural element, it was impossible to ignore the atmosphere that pervaded the production. Stories began to circulate behind the scenes, disturbing dreams, sensations of an invisible presence, a heaviness in the air during certain scenes. There were technicians who became emotional watching rehearsals, extras who, after a few appearances, asked to be baptized, people who joined the project for professional reasons and left transformed. At one point, Mel Gibson himself had to step away for a few minutes during a particularly intense scene. Some said he was crying, others that he was praying. But no, one doubted that it was consuming him inside. The weather, normally stable in the area where they were filming, became unpredictable. Clear skies were covered by dark clouds in a matter of minutes. Gusts of wind knocked over equipment. Sand rose like small storms and disappeared shortly after. It was as if the environment itself was reacting to the content of the scenes. Many called it a coincidence. Others, a sign. Either way, production continued shrouded in this haze between the real and the inexplicable. When the film was finally completed, there was no celebrity parade or talk show interviews to promote it. There was no conventional advertising campaign, no billboards plastered across major cities or primetime commercials. Instead, Mel Gibson's strategy was as unusual as his creation. He took the film directly to churches. Evangelical pastors, Catholic priests, and religious leaders from various denominations received copies for private screenings, not in luxurious theaters, but in church basements, community centers, and small auditoriums. The response was immediate and intense. What the studios had rejected as uncommercial touched the hearts of thousands. Within weeks, word of mouth spread like wildfire. Congregations began booking entire theaters. Families, communities, and even small towns organized caravans to watch the film together. For many, it wasn't a trip to the movies. It was a spiritual experience. And so, on February 25, 2004, The Passion of the Christ premiered without the Hollywood glamour expected, but with a power no one could have predicted. On its first day, it grossed hundreds of millions. On its first weekend, it broke all-time records, and by the end of its run in theaters, it had become the highest-grossing R-rated film in history. But more than just numbers, it had become a cultural phenomenon, a spiritual milestone, an event that moved people on levels beyond entertainment. The emotion was so intense that at several screenings people fainted, became ill, and others wept uncontrollably. The film didn't sugarcoat anything. It depicted Jesus' pain, suffering, and sacrifice in a visceral, often brutal way, but without descending into gratuitous exaggeration. It was raw because the story demanded it. Of course, with such impact came criticism. Even before its premiere, organizations were already speaking out against it. Some Jewish communities accused the film of perpetuating stereotypes and discourses that harked back to centuries of persecution. The graphic violence was another point of strong opposition. Some said the suffering overshadowed the message. Renowned critics even stated that they felt punished while watching it, as if the film wasn't meant to provoke reflection, but rather to impose penance. Opinions were sharply divided. For many, it was the most powerful work on the figure of Christ ever made. For others, a direct attack on sensibility. And amidst all this, Mel Gibson remained silent. There was no direct response, no justification. He let the film speak for itself, as if he understood that any defense would be less than the impact experienced by those who watched it. Abroad, reactions varied, depending on the cultural context. In Mexico, audiences watched the film with almost liturgical devotion. In Poland and Italy, lines formed nightly outside movie theaters. In Brazil, it was shown in both suburban neighborhoods and cathedrals, winning the hearts of millions. but in countries where the historical weight of anti-Semitism remains a sensitive wound, such as France and Germany, there was resistance. Some theaters refused to show it, others did so cautiously and under the watchful eye of human rights groups. Regardless, within Christian communities, the film took on a life of its own. It began to be used as an evangelizing tool, as a starting point for profound reflections on sacrifice and redemption. In many places, it became an extension of the pulpit, but outside the church, the repercussions were harsher. Newspapers dug into Mel Gibson's past, bringing to light controversial statements by his father, a well-known Holocaust denier. Old interviews were re-examined, searching for clues to hidden agendas. And in 2006, 2 years after the film's release, Mel was arrested for drunk driving. During the arrest, he made anti-Semitic comments that quickly became global headlines. His name, until then linked to the resounding success of a Christian work, became synonymous with scandal. And the consequences were not long in coming. Projects were cancelled, partnerships dissolved, and doors were closed. The industry, which had already turned its nose up at the film's content, now found a reason to permanently cut him out of its circles. Even with the public downfall, for many involved in the production, the experience was transformative. Jim Caviezel, for example, never returned to his former career. Despite having starred in major films and being on the rise, he noticed an immediate cooling after playing Jesus. Offers dwindled, his name disappeared from major productions. And although many said he had become difficult or too religious, there was a perception behind the scenes that he had, in fact, been excluded. He, however, never expressed regret. Whenever asked, he said he would do it all over. Again, that it was the most important mission of his life. Over time, he began dedicating himself to Christian-themed projects, giving lectures and sharing how the film had touched him on a profound level. Among the technicians and supporting actors, the pattern repeated itself. Some distanced themselves from the industry completely. Others began to live more introspectively, immersed in a previously dormant spirituality. One of the most striking cases was that of Luca Lionello, the actor who played Judas. An avowed atheist at the time of filming, he converted to Christianity shortly afterward, claiming that his experience on set had left an irreversible mark on him. And the most curious thing is that many of those involved refused to talk about what they experienced. There is no scandal to hide. There is no confidentiality clause. What exists is a silence that seems reverent, as if they had touched something that should not be explained in words. Journalists who tried to revisit the issue with those involved often encountered closed doors, refusals to grant interviews, and silent evasions. It's as if that period had been a portal, something that opened, happened, and then closed, but remains present in the memories of those who lived through it. Some speak of repentance, others of liberation. Some say there was healing, others that there were open wounds. But almost everyone agrees on one point. It wasn't just a film, it was a calling, a crossing, a cross. As time passed, the impact left by the Passion of the Christ didn't diminish. On the contrary, it seemed to deepen. The silence of those involved, far from diminishing interest, only fueled the mystery. Many began to believe that the film had been more than just a cinematic work, that somehow it had been a kind of portal, a point of contact between the visible and the invisible. Several theories emerged, some mystical, some spiritual, some symbolic, but they all shared a common feeling. The project surpassed the limits of traditional cinema. It was a living testament to faith, pain, surrender, and transformation, and for those who were part of it, there was no going back to the previous state. Mel Gibson, for his part, was never the same. Even in the face of the destruction of his public image, the criticism, the rejection of the industry, and the ghosts he carried with him, he never denied that this had been the most important work of his life. In rare interviews, he would let slip phrases suggesting that behind-the-scenes secrets were held that would never be revealed. At times, he spoke of a spiritual battle, of unseen weight, of presences that marked the set, but always with a distant look, as if avoiding touching something that still burns. The emotional and spiritual intensity of that production had left visible marks on his career. He had exposed himself to the extreme, carried the project alone, placed his faith and his name on the line. And for that very reason, he knew he had paid a price that perhaps no one but himself truly understood. As the years passed, rumors about a sequel began to circulate. Some said Mel already had a script. Others claimed he and Jim Caviezel were in contact again to realize what they called the most sacred part of the story, the resurrection. But no official information was confirmed for a long time. What was known with more certainty was that Caviezel himself remained deeply committed to his faith, living a journey of intense spiritual exposure, even facing ostracism from Hollywood. For him, the choice to play Jesus was not a career decision, but a divine calling. And although the world had ignored him, he seemed to accept it with serenity, as if knowing the price was worth the experience. Behind the scenes, stories continued to emerge of crew members who never returned to work on another set. Some sought new paths in life, others went on to study theology or serve in religious missions. People who worked with cameras, lighting, costumes, or special effects became interested in spirituality, silence, and purpose. Some stories are well known, others remain hidden, but they all share a common thread. The passion of the Christ wasn't just a job, it was an experience that reoriented destinies. Even more curious is the fact that, even so many years later, no one deeply involved in the production seeks to publicly revive that memory. There are no official behind-the-scenes documentaries nor memoirs. What exists are fragments, scattered testimonies, discreet interviews, rumors between the lines. Some say this happens because, in fact, what was experienced doesn't fit the logic of explanation. It was sacred. And the sacred by nature isn't always spoken about. Often it's simply kept hidden. Even today, when we re-watch the film, something lingers in the air, not just because of the violence of the scenes, the fidelity to the ancient texts, the actor's dedication, but because of something that escapes the images, a weight, an atmosphere, a presence. And this perhaps explains why so many people are moved by it, no matter how many years have passed. There's something there that touches the soul directly, that speaks beyond words and images, that forces us to face our own faith, our own limits, our own cross. It's not easy to watch, nor should it be. Perhaps that's why the film has been so attacked, so rejected in certain circles, and yet so revered in others. Because it's not content to entertain, it compels. It forces the viewer to look head-on at what many would rather avoid. The pain that saves, the love that bleeds, the sacrifice that transforms. No amount of makeup can hide it. No amount of acting can soften it. What exists is surrender, and those who watch it know on some silent level that it's too real to be just acting. In the end, the Passion of the Christ didn't just change the lives of those who watched it, it profoundly changed the lives of those who made it, in ways many can't or won't explain. Some disappeared from the industry, others reappeared in unexpected ways, and some simply chose silence. But the echoes of that production still resonate because in some way it marked a before and an after. A line that once crossed allows no return. And perhaps that's why, even today, so many choose to see the film as something more than cinema. Because in every scene, in every word in Aramaic, in every fall under the weight of the cross, there's more than narrative. There's a call, a pain that lives on, a presence that won't fade, and a memory that will never be just a story told on screen.